Alison jolted upright in her loft bed, narrowly avoiding smashing her head on the low-hanging ceiling fan. Loud, discordant music reverberated through the floorboards from the basement below, her father Daryl's so-called man cave. The room reeked of stale beer and cigarette smoke wafting up from downstairs. Alison wrinkled her nose in disgust. At 16, Alison felt trapped in this cramped, dilapidated two-bedroom house with her dysfunctional family. Her mom worked 2 jobs just to barely make ends meet, while her dad spent his disability checks on booze and blasted Pink Floyd at all hours. The unfinished basement was his sanctuary, but a hazard to everyone else. Alison's baby sister Lily had needed stitches last year after slicing her hand on an exposed nail down there. Alison swung her legs over the side of the bed and dropped down to the floor, landing with a soft thud. She pulled on her standard gray sweatpants and black t-shirt, sniffing to confirm the shirt was reasonably clean. Her monochromatic wardrobe of black and gray caused her dad to nickname her Dark Cloud, which she hated. It wasn't that Alison was always gloomy. She just found it easier and cheaper to stick to a simple color scheme. She tiptoed out to the living room, careful not to wake her mom and Lily asleep on the futon. A beam of flickering light from the muted TV illuminated their faces. Alison felt a pang of sympathy mixed with resentment. None of them should have to live like this. Needing to escape the oppressive atmosphere, if only for a little while, Alison grabbed her jacket and slipped out the front door into the crisp night air. She took a deep breath, but the fresh air was tinged with the unmistakable skunky odor of weed. Great, now the neighbors were getting high too. Music still thumped from the basement as Alison stood on the cracked concrete steps, wondering where to go at this hour. Just then, an old Pontiac Grand Prix came cruising down the street, windows down, blasting the seductive beat of Janet Jackson's Black Cat. Now that was more like it. The driver, a young man maybe a few years older than Alison, slowed to a stop in front of her house. He leaned out and flashed a charming smile. "Hey there, beautiful. Want to go for a ride?" He had a smooth, deep voice with the hint of an accent that made Alison's heart flutter despite her better judgment. She hesitated, knowing it was a supremely bad idea to get in a car with a complete stranger in the middle of the night. But something about his alluring confidence drew her in. Pulse quickening, she took a few steps forward until the back door opened and a tiny black kitten hopped out onto the street. Alison froze. The kitten looked up at her with luminous yellow eyes before prancing across the road. To her shock, a veritable parade of black cats emerged from the vehicle and followed suit. 9 in total. The strange man climbed out and crossed over to Alison, still grinning, but it no longer seemed friendly, more like a predatory leer. "Forget the kitties, hop in, baby. Let's go have some fun," he purred, reaching for her arm. But the ominous sight of those cats snapped Alison out of her trance. She yanked her arm back. "No thanks, I'm good." His face twisted in anger for a split second before smoothing back into careful nonchalance. "Suit yourself, sweetheart." He slid back into his car and peeled away, music blaring. Alison shuddered, the close call dousing her veins with icy adrenaline. She turned on her heel and half ran back to the house, digging in her pocket for her key with shaking fingers. But the key wouldn't turn in the lock no matter how she jiggled it. Starting to panic, she banged on the door. No answer. She ran around to the kitchen window and hoisted herself up and through it, scraping her leg in the process. She tumbled to the floor and found herself face to face with a strange, half-naked man sitting cross-legged on the linoleum. He was painfully thin with wispy graying hair and old-fashioned reading glasses perched on his nose. And that was all he wore. Alison opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The man just regarded her thoughtfully, apparently unsurprised by her abrupt entrance. "Are you lost, child?" he asked in a raspy voice. "This isn't your home anymore." What are you talking about?" Alison finally found her voice. "Where's my family?" The man tilted his head. "Gone. They left long ago. No one's lived here for years. Except for me, of course." He grinned, revealing missing teeth. Alison scrambled backwards until she hit the wall, chest heaving. This had to be a nightmare, a drug-fueled hallucination. There was no way. She launched herself back out the window and took off sprinting down the street, vision blurred with tears. This couldn't be happening. It had to be the weed she'd smoked earlier messing with her mind. Ahead, bobbing in the darkness, she spotted a bright light. She ran towards it desperately. Help! Someone help me! The light resolved into the beam of a flashlight, held by her father. Alison nearly collapsed with relief. She threw herself into his arms, babbling incoherently. "Whoa, slow down, kiddo," Daryl said gruffly, grabbing her shoulders. He shook his head. "Alison, what the hell were you thinking? I saw you run out of that condemned house down the block. You know, all kinds of sketchy characters squat there. And you reek of pot. Are you high right now?" "What?" "No. Alison looked back at the house she'd just fled. It did look much older and more decrepit than she remembered. But how? "Dad, I was just in our house. And there was this weird naked guy and she trailed off, the words sounding crazy even to her own ears. Daryl's eyebrows shot up. "Naked guy? Alison, I think you were hallucinating. You know what your mom and I told you about drugs? You're in big trouble, Dash." But before he could continue his tirade, a large black shape streaked out of the shadows and lunged at Daryl, hissing and yowling. He yelled and stumbled back as the creature latched onto his leg with sharp claws. "What the hell?" Daryl tried to shake it off, but the thing held tight. Alison realized with horror that it was an enormous black cat, the size of a bobcat or lynx. Its yellow eyes blazed with feral rage as it savaged Daryl's leg. Blood spurted and he screamed. Alison looked around wildly for a weapon, a stick, anything. She spotted a shovel leaning against a nearby fence and grabbed it. She swung it down on the demon cat as hard as she could. It yowled and released Daryl, whirling to face her with a snarl. In the beam of the dropped flashlight, Alison saw the blood dripping from its muzzle and matted in its fur. But it was the eyes that sent ice through her veins, empty, soulless black pits like tunnels to hell. "Alison!" Daryl groaned from where he'd fallen. "Run!" The mutant cat pounced at Alison in a blur of teeth and claws. She thrust the shovel in front of her face just in time. Razor claws screeched against metal as the beast's momentum carried it over her head. Alison struck out blindly with the shovel, felt it connect with yielding flesh, heard an enraged screech. She risked a glance back at her dad, but he was already dragging himself to his feet. One hand clamped over his mangled, bleeding calf. "I'm okay," he grunted through gritted teeth. "Go!" Alison didn't hesitate. She took off running again, breath burning in her lungs, still clutching the bloodied shovel. She had to find help, had to get away from this living nightmare. A shadow swooped low overhead, making her duck. An enormous raven cawed raucously as it circled back around. Alison waved the shovel at it, threatening. Could this night get any more bizarre and terrifying? She just had to make it to the police station, or a church, somewhere safe from whatever the hell was happening. She tried to get her bearings as she ran. There, the neon lights of a 24-hour convenience store glowed in the distance like a beacon. She could use their phone, call 911. She put on a burst of speed and crashed headlong into something solid and warm. Alison rebounded with a cry, raising the shovel, but a strong hand snatched it from her grip and tossed it aside with a clang. Another hand grabbed her by the jacket and lifted her bodily off her feet. She found herself dangling face to face with the handsome stranger from the Grand Prix. Up close, she saw that his eyes were an unnatural shade of amber. He bared his teeth in a savage grin, revealing pointed canines. "Couldn't stay away? Could you, sweetheart?" he hissed. His breath smelled like pennies, like blood. "I love it when they play hard to get." Alison opened her mouth to scream, but his hand clamped over her mouth and nose. She thrashed and flailed, but his grip was inhumanly strong. Spots swarmed her vision as she struggled to breathe. Just as she teetered on the edge of unconsciousness, a loud boom shattered the air, startling the knot man into loosening his hold. Alison dropped to the asphalt, gasping and retching. She looked up to see her attacker staring down at the smoking hole in his chest with shock and fury. Load the next silver round, Lil, Daryl bellowed from behind her. Alison whipped her head around to see her father propped against the graffitied brick wall of the convenience store, an enormous antique pistol gripped in his shaking hands. Lily, still in her unicorn pajamas, stood next to him, frantically trying to reload the gun with trembling fingers. Blood soaked the crude tourniquet tied around Daryl's ravaged leg. "Dad," Alison croaked. The wounded creature snarled, drawing her attention back. She watched in disbelief as the gunshot wound started to close, flesh knitting back together before her eyes. "Oh God, what was he?" "You'll pay for that, old man," he growled, stalking forward. "Right after I deal with your delectable daughter." An arrow sprouted from his eye socket, cutting off his threat. He stumbled back with a hideous screech, pawing at his ruined face. "Step away from my family, demon." Alison's mother emerged from the shadows of the alley beside the store, lowering a massive crossbow. Her dark hair blew in the wind and her eyes blazed with determination and fury. She looked like an avenging angel. "Manga," Alison whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "It's okay, baby. I've got you," her mom said, not taking her eyes off the sputtering monster. She tossed Alison a wicked-looking dagger that she grabbed out of pure reflex. "Aim for the heart. It's the only way to kill the bastards." Hands shaking nearly too hard to grip the hilt, Alison stumbled to her feet. The creature spun to face her, grinning wolfishly despite the arrow skewering half his face. "Come on then, little hunter. Let's dance." He lunged at her. Alison took a deep breath, pictured the creature's heart, and fell back on instinct muscle memory from long ago self-defense classes. She sidestepped his wild grab, catching his arm and using his own momentum to spin him around and pull him off balance. Then she drove the gleaming dagger up to the hilt in his back, angling under the ribs just like her mother had taught her. The demon shrieked and convulsed, black blood spurting from the wound. Alison clung to the knife with all her strength until he crumpled, dragging her down with him. She yanked the blade free with a sickening squelch and scrambled back as he thrashed and gurgled. With one last rattling hiss, the light faded from his amber eyes and he went still. For a moment, no one moved. Then Alison's mom crossed over to her and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Oh, my brave, brave girl. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way." Alison clung to her, the dagger falling from her numb fingers to clatter on the ground. Questions spun in her reeling mind, but she couldn't form words around the massive lump in her throat. Over her mom's shoulder, she saw her dad limping towards them, one arm around Lily. "It was the witch's curse, wasn't it?" Daryl said heavily. "She said it would come back to haunt us." "I thought we'd have more time," her mom said softly. "I hoped we could prepare her slowly, break it to her gently. I never wanted this for her." A tear slid down her cheek. "So all those stories Grandma told about monsters and magic, those were real?" Alison asked numbly. Her parents exchanged a long look before her mother sighed. "Yes, baby. All of it. Our family. We're supernatural hunters. We protect people from the things that go bump in the night. Your father and I tried to shield you from that life, but the darkness always finds a way," Daryl finished gravely. He squeezed Alison's shoulder. "You've got the hunter blood in you, girl. I saw it tonight. You were born for this, as much as we tried to spare you from it." Alison looked at her little sister, wide-eyed and shivering in her nightgown. Would this be Lily's fate too? A lifetime spent battling monsters straight out of nightmares? The future seemed to unfurl before her, dark and dangerous and thrilling. Her life would never be the same. In the distance, police sirens wailed, drawing closer. Soon this macabre scene would be swarming with cops, paramedics, the usual first responders to normal crises. But now Alison knew better. She knew the truth that lurked in the shadows. As if sensing her thoughts, her mother touched her cheek. "Are you ready for this, Alison? Ready to take up the fight? It won't be easy, but we'll be with you every step of the way." Alison looked at each of their faces, battered, exhausted, but fiercely loving. Her family of hunters. She drew in a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "I'm ready." Her father nodded slowly. "It's a hard path, Alicat, but you're strong. You're a survivor, and we'll keep you as safe as we can. Just know this." He placed a calloused hand over her heart. "There's a light inside you that no darkness can extinguish. Always hold on to that. You're stronger than anything hell can throw at you." As the emergency vehicle screamed around the corner, Alison drew her family close, breathing in their mingled sense of sweat, leather, and now blood, gunpowder, and steel. Felt like coming home. The dark clouds parted for a moment, and moonlight glinted off the silver dagger at her feet. It looked like her new path was already laid out before her, gleaming with harsh promise. Alison bent to retrieve the knife, feeling its weight, the way it fit her palm like an extension of her own arm. So be it. She would take up this burden, walk this lonely road. She was a hunter now, and she had work to do.